Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have my friend Frank Sondors. He's the founder of SalesForge, top guy, one of the most intense founders that I know. SalesForge is a great cold emailing software. He's created a bunch of like sub software, InfraForge,
Mm.
MailForge, WarmForge from it. So that guy is just like next level on the execution side of things. You're gonna see in a couple of moments. Podfire.com is presenting this one. Podfire is my podcasting company. If you want to start a podcast, pretty much the best front end sales offer nowadays. So you can cold email people with that offer and just get 100 to 200 leads per month. Pretty crazy numbers. You can close 5 to 10% of these, generate leads, being paid by AdSense, and even create sponsorship opportunities. So podfire.com, we have an ebook for that and a masterclass for you to follow. Frank, welcome to the pod again. Tell me a bit more about yourself for the audience and what are you up to nowadays?
Yeah, so Frank, I've been in sales for now over a decade. I started my career really back in the days at Google, and then was essentially an IC, so working a bunch of sales teams, typically a top sales rep, and then after that I started my company called. So after that I led a sales team for about 50, and then after that I started my company called SalesForge. Really, where I had essentially the epiphany moment around the fact that the only way to scale in a sales-led organization is just by hiring essentially a bunch of reps. And that's where ultimately how I got into the world of Salesforce, where ultimately I help companies today, thousands of them, to help to generate sales pipeline, but with the least headcount possible, and doing so with the highest probability. So as an example, when I had my sales team of about 40, 50 people, we had a kind of similar revenue levels that I'm having today with just 3 sales individuals. So times have massively changed. And back then it was growth at all costs. Naturally, if some of you remember those days back in 2021, whereas today it's all about being lean and mean, right? And essentially generating significantly higher output levels with the least possible headcount. And that is possible today with LLMs, AI agents, you name it. There's a lot of things that can be done. You, Charles, you do a lot of that yourself, right? So we do that as well with our own software, Salesforce, where you can essentially combine your sales team or yourself essentially with AI agents in one environment to maximize coverage and minimize cost. But apart from doing that, we also use our own AI agents, which sit on top of automation software called N8N. There's also a bunch of other automation platforms like Mail.com, etc., that could be used, but ultimately also automating a lot of different processes internally so that we don't end up hiring essentially a lot of people. That's all the way down from sort of reporting, pinging essentially in Slack when something good happens, when something bad happens, right? And informing ultimately different parts of the organization so that we don't have to do a lot of the repetitive tasks. So yeah, quite a journey. We launched about 21 months ago or so. Scaled quite fast to a multi-million-dollar ARR. We're the fastest growing company in the first 12 months versus any competitors that we know out there. And apart from building just one software, yes, we're pretty crazy on that front. We build a bunch of other softwares as well. We're a bit like Microsoft suite of apps, or maybe Apple, where essentially we don't just build one thing, but we build in parallel multiple other what we call forges. And the reason why we're doing that is we're looking to solve essentially different pain points that the users are having, but still, which kind of flows nicely into the division that we have, right? Really helping company generate that pipeline instead of you having to go to sort of different vendors, buying different solutions, having different support teams, multiple invoices, etc. We're really looking to provide all of that from one vendor, which is the Forge essentially. So yeah.
Let me start with the first obvious question. You and I were savages when it comes to like startup and execution and building companies, and most people don't understand that. You build SaaS. I'm a consultant, so I get like way more feedback on people thinking I'm weird and not understanding why I build so many companies and the level of execution, right? So, why are you built that way, and how do you? Yeah, what happens when you hang around like normal people? Do they think you're an alien?
So I'll start with the latter one. So typically people call me the machine. and then they bump into my LinkedIn profile, and it literally says the machine on my LinkedIn profile. So that's before they even bump into LinkedIn. So yes, so typically you do have a perception when you go out there. So for example, last week I did a couple of talks, essentially hosted a couple of events myself on all things scaling. And yes, you typically when you're a founder in the audience or a salesperson, then you listen to me for like an hour or two, you're like, damn, I thought I know a lot, but then I don't know much. And that's because, we share a lot, and I'm kind of sharing all the value bumps that in terms of kind of scaling, what could be done, etc., and what really moves the needle. So that's one hand, but kind of execution kind of piece, what you mentioned around, kind of doing batshit crazy stuff. So in the world of SaaS, and it doesn't matter in the world of agency, etc., but you really need to move fast. And yes, you need to execute, and you need to out-execute. And it's important, particularly in those cases when you have a ton of competitors. So we have over hundreds of competitors, at least, across all the forges that we have. And the only reason why, not the only reason, but probably one of the key reasons why we're more successful than many of our competitors is because we just ship very fast. So we're a product and engineering organization, and that means the engineers that we have and product people that we have, they operate a bit like salespeople, where they have monthly targets that they need to deliver. So they need to ship a high quality software, but very fast, and not just for one, Forge or one product, but across multiple products that we operate. So it's quite a tense environment, generally, that we're in. I typically, when we go through a hiring stage, we say, hey, listen, you could work for government, maybe you should work there. You could work for a corporate, you could work for a startup, and then within the startup, there's this tiny sliver of what I typically would describe top 1% startups, where you have to move exceptionally fast. And typically, we just kind of add the cherry on top. The reason why we want to move exceptionally fast is because we want to become all of us filthy rich. Now, if you don't want to become filthy rich, then we're probably not a fit. But if you have goals in mind, you want to get to a point where this is, a $1 billion company, and you have stock options in the business, you want to probably become a filthy rich. So that's why we want you to work hard, etc. We want to be pushing, and we wanted for you to have sort of similar execution levels to the founding team, right? So there's 3 people on the team. And yeah, it's a team sport, really, right? You have to be rowing together, and you have to get people into the mindset. So I think the mindset piece is quite a big piece. Generally, when it comes to sort of execution, it's very hard to get people into that mindset. But once you're in that mindset and everybody's rowing and everybody's moving fast, things do happen very fast, and you're like, damn. Like you said, Frank, I spoke to you like a year ago. You're a different man to right now with all the forges, and there's more coming, right? So we're launching another forge in a month's time. And then again, in Q4, we're going to launch another one, and so on and so forth. So we definitely very aggressively ship, and we're adding these sort of what we call revenue slivers across all the forges, and which is what essentially accelerates the company.
Right. And the question was more like how to create such a being, because it seems that money gets such a bad rap nowadays with all the wokeness, and people are like, yeah, money, no, I prefer just like sitting on my ass and letting my mortgage eat me, and doing the 9 to 5 and getting lobotomized. Why is it a priority for you to get filthy rich?
So, if you're being very transparent with everybody in the company, right? So you could, you want to give people the, where are we headed to, right? So on an individual level, right? So people want to, have a good ride. Essentially, they want to work with a company that has a good vision. They're building something exciting. It's definitely very, exciting to work internally. Meaning, you also, part of working hard, you're playing hard, right? So having a good time, right, as you're scaling. But people definitely, in their own mindset, right, individualistically, they want to get to a stage where something changes in their life, and that change is like filthy rich change, state. And a lot of people, even though they don't openly voice about this and wanting to be filthy rich, definitely inside of them, they want to be in that state. And filthy rich typically means, the company moves so fast, you're aggressively scaling, etc. And you need to be, in that mindset. You need to have that sort of milestone in many, many years, typically 5 to 10 years, somewhere, in that range. You definitely get to a stage where, damn, I've made it, right? So you want people to be rowing towards that milestone and get to that stage. And it's super important that you're putting people in that sort of mindset, because otherwise, you should be definitely going for the other option, working for the government, whatever, right? and sitting on your ass and paying for that mortgage, whatever else you have in your life, debts and all that stuff. But we want people to to work really hard ultimately, and work ethic nowadays. Even though a lot of people say, I'm the most hardworking individual, and then you put them on a job, right? And we have a probation period of 3 months, and then you definitely see that they're up good. And the way that, for example, we hire individuals in our organization, so everybody's on probation period of 3 months, but by default, an individual does not pass probation by default, unlike in 99% of companies out there. And the reason why we do that is what happens essentially during the 3 months. So when a person joins the company, you go for a test drive at 3 months to that probation period. And what we do is we build essentially a business case for that individual to keep them on as individual. And
But why hire when you can have AI agents?
What's that?
Why hire when you can have AI agents, chat GPT operators, like the very beginning of that? I am not bullish on humans.
Good question. So yes. So the first part is when we actually do hire anybody, or when we have essentially a problem, right? And we're like, oh, somebody needs to solve this. The first question we ask ourselves, can an AI agent solve that? Right? The first and foremost question. If an AI agent cannot solve that, okay, can we? So it's typically like off-the-shelf solution. So if an off-the-shelf AI agent of any company cannot solve my problem, the next question, like, okay, can we build a flow in N8N to solve that problem? Again, if the answer is no, then the next question becomes, should we outsource that to somebody like, I don't know, like you, Charles, on a particular topic, right? Or like anybody? Can we outsource that because they are smart people, they're doing this as the core business, and maybe outsourcing is really the best option? So if the answer is no, sort of 3 times in a row, then you pick the worst option, and the worst option is to hire an individual, right? So, yes, so we have scaled. Back in January last year, there were just literally 3 co-founders in this business, and today we have 37 employees. Now, another bit, I don't believe that the number of employees that sort of that you manage as a CEO or as a founding team correlates to success. Like, arguably, I would want to have the least headcount. That's just 3 co-founders, but it's just not possible, right? When you're scaling, so you do add the necessary evil, which eats up your profitability. But yeah, so my take is, as we're progressing into the future, with everything that's happening on the LLM front, the AI agent front, I think more and more things will be possible. And then ultimately, what we want to get to is like where you have ultimately a flat headcount, but your revenue goes up all the time, right? That's, I think, the best case scenario that can happen. And we're also already seeing, I think, a lot of companies, especially in the US, that are able to achieve that. Literally have the same headcount, and the revenue just keeps on going up nonstop. You definitely want to have that, right? So why? I always kind of, I also invest in a few companies, and when I see that, with the revenue increase, the headcount also kind of goes up the same way, it's like something's off here, right? And I, for example, personally, I would never want to invest in companies like that. I definitely want to see more of a where flat lines and the revenue just keeps going up. So.
Our sales agents here, like, you're probably one of the first founders to think about that right now. Like, when are these gonna be deployed? I don't see much difference. I think an agent would do a way better fucking job than I would. It has so many data points. It knows who to follow up with. It knows who will be interested in my solution. What is stopping us from generating such an agent?
So I totally hear you. So yes, that's an example where you can definitely apply an agent, give it context. It will be faster, cheaper, etc. Right? So we use our own agents, that we're selling, plus other agentic capabilities, right, to improve the bottom line. I think what's stopping some of the companies. So let's say you are a business where majority of the revenue comes from cold calling prospects. Now, if you want to use an AI agent to cold call prospects in the US, as an example, that's illegal. So essentially, the regulation stops you to use an AI agent. That's an example, right? So this is where, for example, why we're big believers in MailForge, where we have to blend humans and AI agents, just in case if the US government or Europe, whatever, decides to shut down AI agents in one way or the other, right? You still have the human play if necessary. So that's an example that the regulation may stop you. Now, I think the other example is, let's say you have a huge engineering team. So there's definitely the question that always pops into our minds: why don't we just use more AI agents, say for QA, so quality assurance? Why don't we use more AI agents to ship more code, etc.? And yes, you can definitely increase the output by using at least the Copilot stuff, for example, like Cursor, etc. But still, like full-on replacements of engineers, for example, that's not yet possible. The other thing is, for example, where the agentic stuff still, does not play a part is, for example, doing, let's say, social selling on LinkedIn, right? Doing that kind of personal branding stuff that a lot of sort of sales reps do on LinkedIn, and you do generate revenue also from that. You generate leads, revenue, etc. So I would say, definitely a lot of improvement that you can make in particular channels, particular places with agentic, but still in some areas AI agents do not help, and that's where still can put the human in place. And of course, you want to be naturally compliant in different territories, etc. So that's where I think I still see the challenges. Plus, I do expect more regulation to come in the future years, so that may curb down some of the use of AI agents. But I'm still, optimistic that we're all going to see major cut down in terms of sort of headcount. I kind of compare that to kind of back in the days like the factories, right, and where robotics came into factories, right, and a lot of people kind of stopped working in a lot of a lot of factories out there. And they just got other jobs, right? So there was essentially a labor redistribution. So we're going to see something similar also, I think, from a software standpoint, right? So a lot of kind of office workers, right, doing the stuff on their computers, whether that's finance, sales, etc. Essentially, there's fewer of those individuals kind of typing stuff on laptops, and there's more agentic flows that are coming to play. And the reason why this is also will be accelerated is because ultimately, if the salaries going to keep on rising higher and higher, right? So essentially, the CAC increases for a lot of, say, SaaS companies, etc. This is what puts a pressure on the organization to implement even more AI agents, right? Because ultimately, AI agents will be cheaper, faster, better, but only in particular areas, right? So this is why definitely more and more companies will be forced to implement that. But hey, I'm based in Europe, and I still see a bunch of companies that don't even know what ChatGPT is, right? So we're still also seeing a lot of companies offline, that doesn't matter, online, that don't even use any form of AI. So we're talking about AI agents, LLMs here, but you have to kind of probably also step back and kind of think about it. Damn, still the huge part of the market does not even know what ChatGPT is, even though everything's written about it in the newspapers. So I would say we're still gonna see. It's gonna take us quite some time to see a lot of the AI stuff and the AI agents coming into play across many of the industries. So yeah.
Right. Tell us about the deliverability landscape change that happened 1 to 2 years ago. Outlook and Google spamming a bunch of emails, and how MailForge adapted to that.
Yeah, good question. So naturally, if anybody is listening is a founder, or you're doing sales, you're an agency, whatever, I think 3 to 5 years ago, you could easily send a bunch of emails from your primary business domain, and you were laughing, right? You're getting replies, and everything was happening. And then at some point, sort of 3 years ago, a lot of companies started to see the decrease in efficiencies. And then ultimately what's happening is because there's more and more emails in circulation, and there's also more and more bad actors that have popped up over the last few years, essentially sending ransomware to enterprise companies. That led to a wave, or essentially an increase of anti-spam softwares. So those popping up. But also what happened at the same time is essentially Google and Microsoft, when they've seen these trends, they started to curb down essentially the traffic, right? So the emails that are being sent. Ultimately, essentially, any form of email that comes from another domain, which is essentially an unknown sender to that receiving party, essentially they became a lot more strict on those emails. Essentially, start scanning what goes into that email, potentially not delivering emails going to quarantine, or landing in spam, essentially. So more of that started to happen rather than actually emails landing in the primary. Then within those organizations, naturally they try to making sure that their employees are not clicking on some random links in those emails. They're not downloading any of the stuff, right? That may be ransomware, etc. So definitely a lot more organizations became more and more cautious due to the threats. Whether those threats are coming from, doesn't matter, countries like Russia, North Korea, whatever. You definitely want to protect your employees. So as a result, on a normal typical business that used to send a bunch of cold emails from the primary business domain, the efficiencies have massively dropped. So then, of course, over the years, we've seen in the industry a new way of doing things, essentially spinning up what's called secondary domains. They're also called parallel domains, burner domains. Essentially, these are domains that are procured additionally. So you used to do that back in the days through registers like GoDaddy, another registrar. So you set up the domain, do the DNS records. So this is typically like DMARC, SPF, etc. You do that manually, and then you get a bunch of sort of Google accounts or my MS365 accounts. You set those up, and you would use those. And the reason why you set that up is so that you protect essentially the reputation of your primary business domain. And you wanted to do that because ultimately, what means today, when it comes to sending cold emails, every email that is being sent from your primary business domain, you are at risk of being spam reported, blacklisted, etc. And you don't want to harm the reputation of your primary business domain. So this is why you started to set up these bunch of secondary domains out there. But the dilemma with that is that paying for all these accounts was definitely very expensive. Setting up these domains is very cumbersome. So it takes a lot of time, and still people make a ton of mistakes with the DNS records. And if you make those mistakes, then again, those mistakes lead to durability issues. So yeah, back in the day, so back in January, essentially last year, we launched what's called an alternative email infrastructure, essentially a software that would be able to essentially spin up those domains and email accounts literally within a few minutes. So we solved that, humongous pain that folks had with setting all up. Also naturally with the cost and everything. And today we essentially became the largest email infrastructure provider out there. So we already actually have also built another software which just works very, very differently. That's called InfraForge.ai. So the second software, you can set it up essentially using what's called dedicated IPs. And we just recently rolled out also a reseller program of that. We can sort of fully white label the thing. So yeah.
So what are your top goals for this year? I think like we were talking some time ago was still user acquisition. Are you raising capital this year? What's your ultra focus?
Yeah, so we're a typical what I would describe VC case, right? So we can definitely get to this being a very big business. We decided to raise money, so we raised last year $500,000. Though the fun fact is that we've spent none of that money. We actually we're always profitable and still are, but we will raise most likely a Series A round later this year, so it's going to be a big one. We're not going to do that anytime soon, meaning not this quarter, not next quarter. We're going to do that in second half of this year, most likely. So we will raise around because we do want to accelerate the product expansion. So what we call vertical expansion, to build out more stuff within the current forges, but also do what we call horizontal expansion, so build out a bunch of other forges. But essentially, all of them will have something to do with building pipeline. So we have quite a good, nice product roadmap set already for the next 2 to 5 years of what needs to be built. So that's all solid. And really, in our market, the best product wins, right? So we want to definitely heavily invest into building a kick-ass product. And actually not just one, but multiple, right? So you can assemble a bit like Lego, right? And only use the stuff what you really need. So yeah.
And what are your personal goals? How do you fuel that entrepreneurial brain of yours to be that productive? Like what's a day-to-day in your life looks like?
Good question. So I always say, you need to feed your brain with, I guess, inspiration and energy. And I think, you want to feed of other very smart founders, right? I think this is the best way to kind of keep yourself excited. So I don't know. I would even, simple things that you would do. I would, for example, follow the likes of, say, Jason Lemkin. Right, and you can follow him very simply on LinkedIn. You can join some of the sessions that he does with the founders, etc. And he makes you kind of think about the right things that you need to think about as a SaaS founder. Now, the reason why this is important, say for people like me, so this company that I've launched is the first ever company that I've launched, right? So we're first-time founders, right? And we will definitely gonna fail and gonna do a lot of wrong stuff. and we want to minimize the wrong stuff that we do, right? And to do that, you want to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, if that's possible, right? So always surround yourself with smarter than you, more experienced, that have done that, right? So you can pass on some of the learnings over to you and make you kind of think about things. And then if you don't know what you're doing, and Jason Lemkin can't help you, and other great people can't help you, which are called more generalists, I definitely jump on a call with other SaaS founders that are either in a similar sort of trajectory, right, in terms of growth and what they're doing. Could be actually from the same space. Sometimes they're competitors, so sometimes you jump on the call with a competitor and you have a chat about stuff. But also sometimes you talk to other founders that are kind of a couple steps ahead of you, right? So they're already maybe raised a Series A, right? And these are the example founders that I would sort of try and connect. And I always say, don't be shy. Just connect with them on LinkedIn, and say, hey, I would really love to grab some time next week for 30 minutes and kind of exchange some thoughts, some ideas in terms of growth, etc. And that's an example of what I'm doing with one CEO, for example, this week, where I just literally randomly just send him a message on LinkedIn. You can do that same thing on X as well. So yeah.
Love it, dude. Where can people find out more about you and MailForge?
So whether that's Salesforge, MailForge, or any other forge, you find out about me on LinkedIn. Just connect with me. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a question. If you need any advice, or if you want to jump on a call or anything, I'm more than happy to do that. Exchange some thoughts in terms of when it comes to scaling. A brief day in, day out, all things pipeline. So yeah, don't be shy.
I was